Well, good afternoon and welcome to H360 Live. My name is Dave Duplay, and joined here in the studio with me is my colleague Cortland Long. Hello, Cortland.
Hi, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
I'm well, thanks.
Well, we have an exciting show for you today. Remember, chat it up. It's to the right. When you hear something you like or you want to ask a question, we've got an unbelievable show. We have the organization Donate Blood Cancer coming in. We've got Mark Segreto and Jack Kirkland are going to be joining us on the set in about 5 minutes. We're going to talk about bone marrow transplant. We're going to talk about blood cancer. You're not going to want to miss this. Remember, the chat is to the right. Use the hashtag #RealStories when posting. We want to hear from you during this broadcast. But first, as always, we're going to start out with an interesting article that we came across last week. And it's all about dog bites. And the article was, dog bites, it's a public health issue, but most can be prevented. And we're going to give you some recommendations here in a minute. But I want to go through a few statistics with you about dog bites. I was just astonished to understand and learn that there are about 4.7 million dog bites in the U.S. alone. That's a lot of dog bites, and we don't want to disparage our furry friends. We love animals. Man's best friend is a dog, remember, but 4.7 million bites a year. So even the friendliest of dogs can bite when they're startled or stunned. Always be cautious because, and this is going out to the nannies and the parents and babysitters, when a child is bitten and they're scarred for life. Most children will run up to a dog and put their face up to it, causing the dog to be startled. About 2/3 of the dog bites in children occur in the head and neck area, so you've got to really watch that. About 28,000 plastic surgeries done last year due to dog bites, so it is really, really important to educate family, friends, and children on how to act around our furry canine friends. And Cortland, I know we've got some recommendations to help our viewers out there to prevent these dog bites, which seem to be on the rise. Mm-hmm. So what do we have in terms of recommendations for our audience?
Yes, this article had a lot of great recommendations, and there's a lot that goes into the decision of getting a dog. So before you go out and purchase a dog, it's important to talk to your local veterinarian about what size and breed is going to be appropriate for your family and your housing situation. Now, as Dave just mentioned, a lot of dog bites occur in children, so aside from never leaving a baby or a small child alone with a dog, it's also important to tell children when not to bother a dog and also how to ask for permission before petting a dog. It's really important to let the dog sniff you or your child before petting it. Now, this next one also is super important. If you find yourself where you're being threatened by a dog, it's important to stay calm, back away slowly, or stay still until the dog leaves. And if you're unfortunately knocked down by the dog, curl into a ball, protect your face and your neck with your hands. If you suffer a bite from a dog, it's important to rinse with warm soapy water and elevate the limb. For deep bites or puncture wounds, wash and dry the wound and use a sterile bandage. And before you go to the doctor, it's important to cover the wound with a sterile bandage. Now, because these dog bites are so important, Dave, you may recall we sent interns out to Bryant Park to see what the general public knows about dog bites.
We did send them out. I think we've got some fantastic footage. If you like the footage, remember the chat is to the right. Use the hashtag #RealStories when posting. So, Cortland, what do we have?
Well, let's roll the footage.
All right, let's watch.
Who let the dogs out? Who let the dogs out?
Have you ever been bitten by a dog?
No. Yes, I have been bitten by a dog.
Yes.
Yeah, I have.
What kind of dog was it?
My Shih Tzu.
It was a pincher.
I can't remember. It was like a type of guard dog, I think.
Did you do anything to provoke it?
I took away a toy. I guess that would do it.
No, but he was in potty training and he was just not really getting trained. So and he was just nervous.
I think I tried to pet it.
And I caught him that he peed somewhere at home, and then I was just like, and he kind of sensed that I was going to be upset, and then he just went crazy.
Lashed out.
Yeah.
And how many dog bites do you think happen a year in the U.S.?
Maybe 800.
800?
Mm-hmm. Probably more than 1,000.
Steve, we're back live.
Sorry. Wow. You know, that song is going to be stuck in my head the rest of the day, you know, Who Let the Dogs Out.
It's a good song.
So, unbelievable. I guess people didn't know over 4.7 million dog bites a year.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Cortland, I have to ask the lady with the purple hair, what was up with her?
She's just a typical New York City character.
She is a character, had a lot of good things to say. Now, I found it interesting. The one lady had a dog and took the toy away and got in bed.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of when not to bother a dog.
Yeah, so that should be on the list of recommendations. If your dog is playing, especially with children, your child sees the dog has a toy. It might even be the child's toy. The dog doesn't know. The child goes for the toy, and not a lot of good things happen from there, I don't think. Cortland, have you ever been bitten?
I have not. Have you?
I have, yeah. It was unfortunate. I was just a little boy. I lived next to Mr. and Mrs. Brown. The dog's name was Tippy. Very old dog. I think the dog was blind in one eye and had a cataract in the other. And I probably approached the dog too fast, a sudden move, and I got my finger bitten. And a little bit of blood, no stitches, and at the end of the day, Tippy and I made up, and that's the story.
That's pretty scary.
Yeah. So remember those recommendations if you enjoyed them. Let's talk about it. I want to see it to the right. Hashtag real stories. Well, now, guys, as you know, is my favorite time of the show. We've got our guests ready to come on set. But first, I want to go through a couple of statistics about blood cancer and the bone marrow donation process. Did you know that every 4 minutes, someone is diagnosed with blood cancer in the U.S.? Imagine that, every 4 minutes. That is an astonishing number to me. And while many of those are diagnosed, a bone marrow transplant is their only hope of survival. About 30% of those patients, or those that are diagnosed, are going to get a transplant from a family member. 70% are going to rely on a friend for that donation. So it is really, really important. Over 13,000 patients last year relied on a friend. So we got to do something about this. There's 2 ways to donate. One is the peripheral blood stem cell donation. We're going to hear about that. The other is the bone marrow donation, and we're going to talk about that as well. Well, gentlemen, thanks for coming into the studio today. It is a real pleasure to have you both here. We have a situation on our hands that we've got to get our arms around and get resolved. I want to talk about the bone marrow donation process and getting on the registry. But if we could just take a step back, and let's talk about this thing, blood cancer. Let's start there.
So I understand there are 3 kinds of blood cancer: leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma. Can you guys walk our audience through what those types of cancers are and the differences?
Mark, do you want to?
Sure. Actually, it's interesting you brought that up. Multiple myeloma is actually a blood cancer that occurs in, according to the CDC, in over 30% of firefighters in the country. Mostly they are cell disorders that start in the bone marrow and then transfer over to the blood, which then again can go into the spine and the brain and lymph nodes.
And so you just mentioned cell disorders. There are also blood and marrow disorders, such as anemias, where your body is unable to produce the amount of red blood cells that you need. Can you tell our audience a little bit about those disorders as well?
Well, I can actually say that those disorders, you know, for the majority of the time that we've been doing bone marrow transplants, were not things that were necessarily treated with bone marrow transplants. They were disorders, obviously, that had to do with the cells and the interior of the bone marrow, but it's only in the last few years that we've actually seen this increase in transplants being used for these diseases. So anemias in particular were something that were always treated with pills, with specific regimens, but it was something that you were going to live your entire life dealing with. And now with these newfound research into bone marrow transplants for these diseases, we're seeing that we can actually hesitate to use the word cure, but we can give them relief from these daily regimens.
So let's talk about numbers for a minute here. There are over 500,000 registered donors in the U.S. and over 4.5 million worldwide. That sounds like a lot, but it's not enough, right? Because there are 6 out of 10 patients who are still struggling to find a donor, especially if you have diverse ancestry.
Yes, and I mean, it's something we'll actually, just to give an update, we actually just passed the 5 million mark.
Wow.
So it's exciting, but the problem still remains that, yeah, we're seeing less than half of the patients in need will receive a transplant. And this is to do with a lot of factors. It could be the patient's health, it could be different issues with the donor. But the one thing that we can control, and that we're really trying to encourage people here, is get on the registry. If we can expand this number so that every eligible person is there, we know we've taken care of that. And the rest is up to the doctors and the patient, but we can give them much better odds simply by getting more people on the registry.
And as you mentioned, Cortland, ancestry does play a huge factor of matching donors to patients. When you look up the makeup of the U.S., the potential donors that are actually registered, 67% are made up of Caucasians, 10% Hispanic, 7% Asian American, and 7% African Americans. What that means is, just real simply, if you're a Caucasian, you're generally going to have an easier chance of finding a match than someone who is Hispanic or someone who is African American. So that's why we look to work with communities and especially universities on building the amount of potential registrants in the pool.
Now, Mark, I know that you're relatively new to the organization.
2 years, Dave.
2 years, okay, relatively new.
Okay.
And I do also know that you got there by way of a personal story.
Sure.
And I'm hoping that you could share that story with our viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got started with the organization Delete Blood Cancer back in, February of 2013. My younger brother, Lewis, was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. He was 23 years old. It really just came about all of a sudden. That's how acute myeloid leukemia works. It's very aggressive, where he was waiting to get on the police force, and then for about 2 weeks, he just felt a little ill. His gums were actually a little bit swollen, and he actually, oddly enough, went to the dentist. That's where they kind of caught this, and they had told him, look, why don't you get checked out by your local physician? He had a blood test done, and about 3 or 4 days later, he was contacted and notified to get to the nearest hospital.
Now, Mark, how old was he at that time?
23.
23.
Yeah. Acute myeloid leukemia, it's more common in older adults, but what the type of leukemia he had was extremely rare. He was diagnosed with leukemia on February 1st of 2013. He was on chemotherapy the very next day. We were notified, the brothers and sisters. I went to Stony Brook University Hospital where he was diagnosed, and we were obviously really scared. Didn't know too much about the disease, and they had let us know that he was potentially going to need a bone marrow match. They had let us know that we should register right there and then, and we actually did. So my 5 brothers and sisters and I think I have 5 brothers and sisters. There are probably many of them that are watching right now. But we all registered. We paid about $200 each to register. We waited about 2 weeks to find out if we were a match. And anybody in that situation or has ever been in that situation can understand 2 weeks was an eternity. In that time, I was told to contact Delete Blood Cancer. And actually, the first conversation I had with the organization was with this fine-looking gentleman to my right, and Jack and I and my family started organizing a bone marrow drive in Long Island. Now,
Mark, when you heard those words that your brother's going to need a bone marrow transplant, did you know what that meant?
Didn't even register. Really didn't. Didn't know what it meant. I've seen it on ER, probably the show ER, and a couple of movies. But aside from that, no, didn't know too much about it. So we were really thrown into this. My family and I and my brother thrown into this without really any knowledge. So we started playing on the bone marrow drive. It really kept us going. We had talked before this interview, Jack and I, and we kind of shared those stories back in 2013 where we were getting a lot of people cooking food for us. And I make the really corny joke that there's only so much baked CD that someone can really make for while you're in the hospital. But we had this positive project in front of us. Instead of basically all gloom and doom, sitting in the hospital room 24/7, we had something positive we were working on where my brothers and sisters were making signs. I was making calls to local establishments. Our friends and our friends of friends were working on basically contacting the community, raising awareness, making posters, and getting everybody to come out to the bone marrow drive that took place in Long Island on March 2nd, 2013.
When you had that first drive, how many people showed up for that?
I'd say about 350, and we registered a little over 200 people because, again, there is some requirements that people registering need to meet. We got a good number of them, again, about 200, and I'm happy to say that out of those 200 people, we found out that one of them actually went on to become a match. His name was Chris Lacanina. He matched for a little boy in Germany that was 10 years old and ended up donating at Stony Brook Hospital back in 2013. And I just want to add that, the day that we drove my brother to the hospital to get his transplant, I'll never forget that day. Very upset. Obviously, he knew he was going to have a long stay at the hospital. And we got the call from his family to let us know that there was a match. So it really justified a lot that he was going through. So.
Now, you say he was going to have a long stay.
Yeah.
So how long was that?
So to prep, that's a good question. To prep my brother for transplant, he needed to undergo, I believe, a 3rd round of very intense chemotherapy. His doctors kind of explained that the prior 2 regimens were kind of like weeding a garden, but that last set of chemo was kind of like taking 2 layers of dirt off. Very intense. So that took about a week to week and a half to prep his body. During that time, that's when I actually donated for him. And you had mentioned there was 2 ways to donate bone marrow or stem cells. So the way I donated, it was May 13th. It was called peripheral blood stem cell donation. It actually occurs 75 to 80% of all donations. What I did was I went to the hospital or a collection center in the city. It's an apheresis procedure. It's actually the same procedure used when donating platelets or plasma. Very common, very straightforward. Laid down a nice comfortable chair. I had blood drawn from my right arm that passed through a centrifuge that collected stem cells out of the blood, and then blood returned into my left arm. It took about 3.5 to 4 hours. I always say this extremely corny joke, but I watched the Yankees lose, and my stepfather fed me a bagel while I did that. And I was at work, I think an hour later. I was actually, so to kind of step back, after the bone marrow drive, I pulled Jack aside and told him I was working for Delete Blood Cancer. He was obviously up in arms saying that they weren't hiring, but I have sales skills plus this face, so got my foot in the door, and I've been working with the organization ever since. But back to the donation, I was literally at work an hour later. That's how easy it was, and people just aren't aware of that process, and it's just so simple.
Yeah. So, Jack, I understand you also have a personal connection to the organization. Would you mind sharing a little of that?
Yeah, I'd be happy. I mean, it's nowhere near the connection that Mark has. But basically, when I was 14, my grandfather passed away on my mother's side, my abuelo. I'm half Hispanic, and he had leukemia. We knew it was cancer. We knew that he was older and that his chances weren't that great. But there was never a moment when bone marrow donation was discussed with us. And to be fair, it may have been too hard on his body, but the fact that it was something that my entire family, and my uncle is, he's actually a scientist, so he's the one doing all his research. He was the only one that knew about it through his own efforts. We were never told this by doctors. And, I actually didn't even know until I came and interviewed for the position here at the company what this was and how it could have helped him. And so for me, the biggest takeaway from that was, maybe the bone marrow donation could have saved his life, maybe it couldn't have. But we were never given the option of exploring that. And the lack of awareness around this, the lack of education for something that can be so impactful, and that we're seeing these numbers, that there's, thousands of patients out there who could have their lives saved, that was the thing that just stunned me. How do we have an answer and that no one's talking about it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You guys have some really inspiring stories, and let's bring some more awareness to it. So can you tell us how someone can get on the list to be a bone marrow donor?
Yeah, I mean, it's very simple. So Mark works in the donor recruitment department, and if you ever wanted to hold a drive, you would get in touch with someone like him. He'd help you set up the whole process, but that's how we get large amounts of people in any community registered. The actual act as an individual is incredibly simple. It's easier than getting your driver's license, which, well, actually, that's kind of difficult. You fill out a form, and it's your basic personal information so that we can contact you if you are a match. You do a cheek swab, which looks like a giant Q-tip. You rub it on the inside of your cheeks. It collects the tissue cells from your cheek. We process that, and what we're looking for is to match this specific genetic information from your cheeks. It's not your DNA. I know a lot of people watch CSI and things, and every time they see the swab, they're like, oh, so you can... Much more difficult process. But what we're looking at is to match your genetic information with the patient's. And this is the really difficult part, because we do have lots of people come and they want to register for someone, or they think that it's as simple as, I'm willing to give, so can I give you my bone marrow? It's the difficulty we face is trying to find these perfect genetic matches. And you just need to get registered, and then you sit on the registry. And I actually love this aspect of it, because if you're an organ donor, if you're a blood donor, you just sit there and wait. And if specifically you, are ever needed to save a life, you get that call.
Well, I got to tell you, I am an organ donor. I'm proud to be an organ donor. I am not on your registry, but I'm sold. If we have people being diagnosed every 4 minutes, we've got to put a stop to this. And so, Mark, would you help me? How do I get on the list? I think you brought a kit for me.
We're gonna swab you up, Dave.
Yeah. All right.
So
all right.
What you're gonna do?
That's the first time I've heard that.
Today. You're gonna pull out those 2 swabs. You're gonna take one of them,
Yeah.
and you're gonna swab your inside of your cheek for 30 seconds.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So while Dave is swabbing, I have a couple other questions for you guys. You know, there's an antiquated notion of bone marrow donation where you get a big needle stuck in your spine. It's a little different today, isn't it?
Yes, and I think that's words you're using there are perfect examples of what we face every day trying to educate people. First thing you hear, so this is a huge needle in my spine. You guys are drilling in my spine. I used to start education seminars with just, there's no power tools, there is no spine. We are not dealing with any of that, so take all of that out of your mind. The process now, as Mark pointed out earlier, about 75-80% of the time is as simple as doing blood platelet donations. The only difference is that we have a drug administered to you for 4 days beforehand called filgrastim, which just increases stem cell production in the body so that we can actually harvest the most amount and give it to the patient. In the rarer cases where you are doing bone marrow donation, the reality of this situation is you will go into a hospital on the day of donation, you get general anesthesia, so you're passed out. They will take bone marrow directly from your pelvic bone, which leaves a scar that is smaller than the tip of a pencil point. Which I've had many donors try to show me, and they're like, no, I can find it, I'll show you. And you're like, it's okay. Don't pull down your pants, please. But you leave the hospital that day, and this is from all of the experience I've had working with donors and patients. What I've heard is it's like you did heavy lifting the day before. You're a little sore, maybe you fell while ice skating, you got that, it's kind of a pain in my butt. But when you especially when you're working in the organization, you work with patients and you hear about bone marrow biopsies, which a lot of people confuse with bone marrow donation, where they actually take a piece of the bone out of the patient to check and see if leukemia or lymphoma, whatever, is still present. That, compared to what you're going through, is nothing. I mean, if you can go in and feel like you fell on your butt, and you're back to your regular routine in a day or two, and you're carried along with the idea that you just saved a life, I can't imagine not wanting to do that.
And just to add, go back to what Jack said about the actual donation, both procedures, they are overnight procedures,
Yes.
outpatient procedures. And to go back to the filgrastim shots, I actually took those shots. They're very fine needles, okay? They're sort of like insulin shots where you won't even feel them going in. What you'll feel is the stem cell buildup in your body for those 4 days. You'll still be at work. You'll probably just be going home at night, having dinner and watching some TV and going to bed. So it's really not invasive whatsoever. So I think as healthy people, I think we sort of have a responsibility to step up to the plate and register. Especially if you have those personal stories. And I don't care if it's cancer or any other sort of illness. I think we have a responsibility. And again, anybody can go onto our website, deletebloodcancer.org, take the 5 minutes to register. You'll get a kit in the mail within 48 business hours with a prepaid envelope. You'll swab, you'll drop them in the envelope, put them in your mailbox, and then you'll be on the registry. And going back to Dave's registration, Dave actually...
How did I do?
You did good, Dave.
The swabbing
plus.
How was my swabbing technique?
It's actually the best I've seen all day, Dave. Possibly all month.
How many have you seen today?
55 on the way over here, probably, right?
Yeah, Mark's never stopped swabbing.
Okay.
He lives this life.
So, Dave already completed his registration form. Dave, I'm going to have you just sign the bottom right here.
Yep.
So numbers again, who pays for someone to come in and be a bone marrow donor?
So do you mean the actual donation or the registration
The actual
process?
donation.
Donation, this is actually a great thing, 'cause I think that's another obstacle. Obviously, everyone worries about money. And it's not something you should be ashamed of. We all have to pay for things in life. So one of the things we do hear a lot is a concern about whether or not this will cost donors anything. Once you register, every single cost that could be associated with this is being taken care of either by our company through the prep work that we have to do. If you are found to be a match, we want to make sure that you are healthy enough, that there's no problems for you as a donor, no problems for the patient. So we'll pay for all that, and the entire donation process is actually covered by the patient's health insurance.
Wow.
So we can guarantee that when you become registered, you will spend $0. You will actually just be able to do something great and walk away with an amazing story and probably have your whole community think you're a hero.
So I just want to let our viewers know there's no reason not to get on this list. With the numbers we're talking about, I really, really urge you, please think about this. Take it seriously. Get on the list. If you're on the list, I'd like to hear about that. If you could chat to the right, hashtag real stories when doing so. But guys, this is really, really important stuff. And I guess I'm done with my process?
Yep. So, Dave, this is your receipt, just for your records.
Okay.
And then this is your donor ID card. Any questions and concerns you ever have, you can always feel free to contact us. Of course, if you move or update any of your information, please let us know. And then this is just a little reminder right here. It's a keychain or key ring on the card. That's our website again, deletebloodcancer.org. Share it with your friends on social. Let them know they can get swabbed 24/7. And congratulations, you're now a registered bone marrow donor.
Thank you. Thank you. Guys, again, every 4 minutes, somebody in the U.S. is diagnosed with blood cancer, and we need your help. So get on the registration list, please. I urge you. We just have a few more questions for you, and I know we may have covered some of these, but I think they're really important. I know that there's another registry called Be the Match Registry. And so I'm now on your registry. Is that another registry? Do I need to swab again to get on their registry?
So here's the great answer. Anywhere in the world, if you registered, you're actually being shared on the same thing. Be the Match Registry is the registry for the U.S. It's the national registry. So this is government funded. They maintain all of the U.S. donors. So we will feed into that. But Delete Blood Cancer is actually an international organization. So we have offices here. We have offices in Germany, Poland, Spain, UK. And we are pulling in to this collective world registry. If you register anywhere in the world, you're there. You're done. You've done your deed.
Good.
Wow.
Good.
So I know we touched on this a little bit before, but I know someone who has leukemia. So can I register for that individual person?
So that is something we do hear a lot. People that obviously your concern is for the person you know, but just by the nature of how this works, when I was describing to you, we're trying to match genetic factors. If it was as simple as you come in and say, hey, I want to give my bone marrow to this person and we could take it, I don't think we'd be facing the numbers we're facing. We'd be able to deal with this a lot easier. But the reality is this is about community. This is about a global community of patients and what they're going through. So when you come to register to drive, you could match for this person. You could have come to Mark's brother's drive and matched for him, or you could match for a 6-year-old girl in Tucson. You could match for a 40-year-old man in Germany. And this is what's the incredible thing, is that we try to say, listen to what the patients are saying at these drives. I've never met a single patient who has said, I just want to get myself a match. They are in the hospital. They are with other patients. They are sharing, these deep, dark parts of their life with people in the next room who are going through the same thing. And it's amazing to see these people who are struggling, who are wondering if they'll survive throughout the year. And their first thought is, this isn't about me. This is about everyone who needs this.
Yeah.
And there's nothing better, as part of our job, there's nothing better for us to be able to get on a call with a family that had a drive and let them know, look, through your hard efforts, you just saved somebody in Oklahoma or California. It's really the best part of our jobs, and it puts a smile on their face. It gives them back some sort of hope and positivity.
Yeah. Now, I know there are some restrictions to the list. I think 55 and older, 18 and younger. With the kind of numbers we're talking about, why do we have restrictions?
So the restrictions act, and this is, once again, something we face. There are many very fit people that are over 55. I will agree. My father would yell at me if I didn't. And it's not a restriction saying, you're 55, your bone marrow isn't good enough, or you're 17. These are put in place partly to protect donors and partly to protect patients. Every restriction we have has to go through the FDA mandates, so we are following government regulations, and these are always put in place not to, we're not denigrating anybody. We're not saying, we don't want old marrow. It's that past 55, there are certain complications that could arise in any voluntary surgical procedure, right? So if you want to do plastic surgery past 55, it may have some risks to it that wouldn't if you were under 55. And because we are asking people to volunteer as donors, we have our own official statement. We will never put anyone at risk. So 55, 18, we know that people between those ages and with the certain health requirements we ask, there are no risks associated.
So I fall somewhere between those age parameters. So what happens if I, match with a donor and they're across the country or across the world? Where do I go to be their donor?
Well, this is also something we recognize. You're doing this voluntarily. It's an amazing thing, and we would like to put the least amount of work on your shoulders for this. So we'll do some basic prep work beforehand. We want to make sure that you are the best match, that you're healthy enough, everything to make sure that there is no risk associated. And that will all be done locally. When you do have to transplant, there are only certain transplant centers you can go to. Not every hospital is equipped to do this. So what we'll try to do is work it so that you go to the one closest to you. There's the possibility, maybe you do need to fly if you live in Maine. I think you may have to go outside of Maine to be able to find a transplant center. Mm-hmm. But once again, most of the donors I've talked to, this is where they're like, oh, where am I going? Okay, cool, I'm going to tell my wife, we're going to have a 2-day vacation, I'll go do that, and then we can take off for a few days. So if you do have to travel, like I said before, this is something that we would give you well in advance, because we do understand people have lives. Maybe you have a wedding that you have to attend. We want to make sure that you are able to schedule this without, interrupting your life, and also be able to cover all those costs so that you never have to worry.
And getting back to the match, so do you have to match 100% of the criteria all the way down the line, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I'm going to give a very basic explanation. If any of your audience would like to learn more about this, I really recommend they come to our website. They also talk to their doctors about it. It's very interesting. But we are looking for a 100% match. And these are these genetic factors we're talking about that we're taking when we swab your cheeks and that we try to match the patient. In some cases, we're not going to say, hey, you know what, we only have a 90% match, so we're not going to go ahead with the transplant. It's always looked at on a case-by-case basis for the patient. But yes, 100% match is what we're looking for, and the specific reason is we're introducing new stem cells into your body. And if anybody has ever dealt with anything where they've had to have organ transplants, anything like that, our body sees this new thing and immediately thinks, oh, got to wipe this out. And if we give you a 100% match, your body doesn't necessarily know the difference. It'll accept it a lot easier, you'll have fewer complications, and the likelihood is that as a patient, you will be able to accept that and fully recover.
Yeah.
And back to what Jack just hit on, a transplant isn't 100% cure. A patient's going to have some complications. Hopefully it's limited, but there's something called graft-versus-host disease, and those complications come in many different forms. That's why I think it's so important to have resources like yours, Healthy0360, yes, where they can go onto the site and find other patients out there going through the same thing. And that's why I really appreciate you guys having us today. I think it's super, super important what you guys are doing for patients out there.
Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time. One last thing I'd like to say. This past Sunday was Cancer Survivor Day. So for all of our cancer survivors, their families and friends, we hope you had a wonderful day, and this show is going out to you. Well, that is all we have time for today. Unfortunately, gentlemen, I want to thank you both for coming into the studio. I'd like to thank our viewers at home for tuning in, and I'd like to thank our sponsors for making this all possible. Remember, all of our episodes can be viewed video on demand at healthy0360.com. We also have a new podcast which can be found in the iTunes store. Healthy0360 can also be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. And please don't forget to use the hashtag #RealStories when posting. So on behalf of Cortland Long, myself, and everyone at the Healthy0360 family, we look forward to seeing you again next week. We are going to leave you with a video today from our guest from Delete Blood Cancer. Good day.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast are those solely of the Healthy0360 hosts and our guests for this broadcast. These views and opinions do not in any way reflect the views and opinions of our sponsors, advertisers, or other organizations on Healthy0360, including our community members.